Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this reading on Heraclitus. Last week, as you remember, we focused on the readings of Proverbs and what it has to say. In particular, as you remember, Proverbs is talking about how to live an ethical life by being wise, right? So, as we read, the primary axiom of Proverbs is that by the use of the mind is a necessary and sufficient condition for moral behavior. Now, Heraclitus is quite similar to Proverbs, but he has some different touches. Um, but before we get to what Heraclitus has to say in regards to living an ethical life, I do want to let you know what's the goal of the paper and what is the paper's argument. As I have here, I hope you guys can see the PowerPoint, which I would upload on the module and called extra modules. The goal of the paper is to, number one, you can find it in the introduction, examine the ethical dimension of Heraclitus' thought in the detail and explore its connection to his other views. Now there's a goal, now there's the argument of the paper. The argument of the paper is that it argues that Heraclitus believed an adequate comprehension of the world and of our place within it is necessary for living a good human life. There's some aspect of us comprehending the world in which helps us live a good human life, which we're going to get to later. So, Heraclitus' view, the relationship between God and man and his conflict between human and divine undergird his ideas about the importance of wisdom for living well. So there's this aspect of a relationship between this divine logos, which the reading calls logos, Logos. There is this contrast and relationship between this logos and human beings, which helps in being a moral person. So this is overall the goal and argument of the paper. And when you're reading the paper, this is what you should have in mind when reading these texts. So let's go to the next PowerPoint. So here's the key difference between Proverbs and Heraclitus. Remember, Proverbs says, the last week's reading, the primary axiom as the use of the mind is a necessary and sufficient condition for good and moral behavior. But that's not what Heraclitus says. Heraclitus says the soul is the necessary and sufficient condition for moral behavior. Okay, so you have to understand the difference between the two. Proverbs says the mind is a necessary and sufficient condition for moral behavior, whereas Heraclitus says the soul is a necessary and sufficient condition for moral behavior. Now, you may argue that maybe the soul and the mind are the same. That's something that you can argue, but this is not the case now. Heraclitus wants to say the soul, and Proverbs wants to say the mind. The mind is a necessary sufficient condition for moral behavior, and for Heraclitus, it is the soul is a necessary and sufficient condition for moral behavior. Okay, so make sure you understand the distinguishing the differences of those two. So, as you can see that in the very beginning of the Heraclitus reading, that the soul is a necessary condition of moral behavior. Heraclitus also wants to say that the senses is involved somehow in living an ethical life. You have to have a good moral compass, right? But by having this good moral compass, you have to have your soul in balance. Your soul needs to be in harmony and balance in the sense that you are not distracting your soul into viewing and understanding this moral compass. So, for instance, if you were to drink alcohol, alcohol is going to distract you and is going to blind you into what you ought to do in certain circumstances. So, for Heraclitus, this Greek pre-Socratic philosopher, he wants to say that the senses is necessary to really arrive at a good moral place. You have to be balanced in your soul, but by being balanced in your soul, you have to have this good sense of senses. And if you have your senses blinded, you're gonna get into a lot of trouble. Hence, alcohol. Alcohol will blind you and make you do drastic decisions that would affect your balance, your soul balance. So the senses being guided correctly is something important in Heraclitus' thoughts, which balances the soul. Well, in addition to this, remembering what we mentioned at the very beginning, um, he mentions in the paper's arguments, right? The first bullet point, it says we have to comprehend this world. This comprehending the world has to do for Heraclitus. It deals with and relates to ethics. So when he says here, right, in the first bullet point, we ought to grasp this very thing called the logos. It is argued what this logos mean, but many scholars would suggest that logos means divine. You have to, you need to grasp the divine, and by failing to grasp this divine being, the logos, it would cause the individual to go into drastic trouble. So what Heraclitus claims is that most people fail to understand something shared and available to them. So like Proverbs says that wisdom calls in the streets to see who will listen to it. Heraclitus wants to say something similar, in which people are going to fail to understand this very thing that's available to them, which is for Heraclitus the logos, this God, divine person who is all wise. So to listen to the logos is to comprehend the world, similar to Proverbs. To listen to wisdom is to understand the world. Well, for Heraclitus, to listen to these logos, right, is to comprehend the world as a whole, based on its revelation of itself to use in our experience. So when people are not comprehending or grasping the logos, it's because they fail to grasp the fundamental nature of the world in which they live. They both go together, according to Heraclitus. Understanding the logos is you understanding the world. If you understand the world, then you understand the logos. Okay? But part of understanding the world and understanding the logos is you having your soul in balance. That means having your soul in balance means that you're using your senses correctly. You are interpreting phenomena in the way it should be. So, so what exactly are these individuals missing? What should they do to attain understanding? Well, that's a big question. What should we do? Or what should individuals do to actually obtain the logos and understand what the logos is practically saying about the world? So, like I mentioned, the senses. The senses are needed to acquire wisdom, but sense experience is not sufficient because our senses must first be interpreted rightly if it is to lead us to understand the world. Once again, your senses need to be interpreted in their correct manner. As a result, if your senses are in the correct manner, then your soul will be balanced. So in Heraclitus' thought, wisdom comes not from learning new facts, but from correctly interpreting what's already before our eyes. So remember, understanding the world is understanding the logos, understanding what is required of us and what we should do as moral agents in society. So there are three reasons why Heraclitus says we ought to strive for wisdom. As I displayed here on the PowerPoint, these three are: becoming wise improves the soul. Secondly, we shouldn't be ignorant of the world. We ought to really strive to understand the world. And third, by becoming wise, we become like God. So these are the three reasons why Heraclitus says we should strive for wisdom. Once again, this is similar to Proverbs, because Proverbs wants to persuade the reader and convince the reader why they should seek after wisdom. But remember, for Proverbs, they want to they praise wisdom, right? Wisdom is beautiful, more beautiful than gold, or more valuable than rubies, right? It's better to be wise and poor rather than being a rich person and be a fool. Proverbs wants to persuade the reader to seek after wisdom. Heraclitus wants to do the same thing. He wants to persuade the reader to seek after wisdom, right? And that's why he mentions these three things. You becoming wise improves the soul. It makes you balanced in your soul. And then we shouldn't be ignorant of the world. By not being ignorant of the world, you are able to comprehend the logos. And by comprehending the logos, the divine being, then you're able to understand the world. and by you becoming wise, you become like God. Well, why? Because your understanding is similar into what the logos sees. So these are some motivations that Heraclitus wants to do to motivate us to seek after wisdom. So for Heraclitus, there are a number of things that he attributes to the divine, the logos, which is God is wise, and we are not. So if we ought to live a moral life by seeking after wisdom, right, and the soul being involved in here somehow, the only way we can seek after wisdom and live a life of wisdom is to become like God, to actually follow and understand these logos, right? Once again, similar to Proverbs. So for Heraclitus, and you were to study the pre-Socratic philosophy and their type of theology, you will see that the most powerful deity has wisdom as his attribute. And for Heraclitus, God guides all things through his wisdom. So true wisdom for Heraclitus is grasping the divine plan for the cosmos. By understanding the logos, you understand the plans of logos. You understand the plan the divine has for the world. And all things in the world are manifestation of this God. Why? Because God's wisdom is what practically guides the world. Once again, there's a correlation between knowing the world and knowing the divine. For Heraclitus, they're both connected. So coming close to wisdom of God is by understanding the plan. This person is one who is wise. The person who is wise that understands God's plan is the one who is wise. So when we approach the wisdom of God, we become more like him or more like God. And since God is better than us and wise above all, we become and live better. So this is similar overall to Proverbs. Both are claiming that wisdom is correlated in for us to live a good, moral, ethical life. However, Proverbs, as I mentioned already, says that the mind is a necessary and sufficient condition for living a good and moral behavior. Whereas for Heraclitus, he wants to say the soul is a sufficient condition for good and moral behavior. But both wants to result in saying that you ought to seek this divine being, right? For Heraclitus is the logos, and for Proverbs is Yahweh. Both of them wants to say that we ought to seek this divine being, and by seeking this divine being, you are able to understand the world in a much better way. Those two are connected. Well, for Heraclitus, they're connected. Understanding the world is understanding God's plan. Understanding God's plan is understanding the world. And by doing those two things, knowing God and knowing the world, you are becoming like God, or becoming more like God. Not becoming like God, but becoming more like God, because you're becoming wiser. You're knowing the wisdom of the divine being. So essentially for Heraclitus, is living a wise life contributes to a happy life. And the only way you can do that is by your soul being balanced, in which you understand the world and the logos. So this is overall Heraclitus's ethics. It's an ancient ethics, which is quite interesting. You know, the ancient world has their particular understanding of ethics, as we've seen in the first reading. They talk about harmony. Well, Proverbs and Heraclitus have similar things to say, and I hope you enjoy the reading. So This is the end of the session. If you have any questions of the reading, feel free to send me an email or come visit my office hours anytime that works for you on Wednesday. And overall, really focus and emphasize on the differences between Proverbs and Heraclitus in regards to the soul and the mind. And so, yeah, if you have any questions, just send me an email, and I'm happy to respond. Take care, and I will upload this very shortly. Thank you, and bye.